before the tariff policy gets even worse, we need to go ahead and pass this before the economy gets even more wobbly. But I think that it also, there's been push from some inside the White House to want to have some tariff policy included in this reconciliation package, which I think is one more giant headache for congressional leadership.
Yeah, especially as they're also trying to deal with the debt ceiling. They're trying to deal with increased funding on the border. This is a potpourri of policy priorities. And a lot of Republicans, I'm old enough to remember just last Congress when they were saying they hated Christmas tree funding bills and the idea that you're just pushing everything together and calling it one big, beautiful bill, which as of right now is kind of the plan. Mark Short, we'll have you back if and when that changes. Thank you,
Thanks,
as always, for getting on with us. And that was way too early for this Thursday morning. Morning Joe kicks off right now.
I asked the vice president if Abrego Garcia has not committed a crime, and the U.S. courts have found that he was illegally taken for the United States, and the government of El Salvador has no evidence that he was part of MS-13. Why is El Salvador continuing to hold him in CCOT? And his answer was that the Trump administration is paying El Salvador, the government of El Salvador, to keep him at CCOT.
Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland in El Salvador yesterday after being denied any access to Kilmar Abrego Garcia. It comes as the judge overseeing the Alien Enemies Act case says there is probable cause to hold the Trump administration in contempt of court. We'll bring you expert legal analysis on both cases. Plus, we'll dig into the new comments from Fed Chair Jerome Powell amid Trump's trade war with China. And we'll have a look at the latest rally for Senator Bernie Sanders and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, drawing another huge crowd in a deep red state. What does it all mean? Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It's Thursday, everyone, April 17th. We're almost through the week. With us, we have NBC News We do have NBC News national affairs analyst and partner and chief political columnist at Puck, John Heilman. Thank you, sir, very much. In place, ready to go. Top of the show. Very impressive. Claire, a couple of times he just wasn't there. But
well, it's always impressive when Heilman gets up early.
It's that
like
and
a
Barnacle.
Snow leopard,
yeah, no, I know.
When you see him, it's a special thing.
I'm introducing him, and I'm filled with angst because I don't know if his picture's actually going to pop up. But he leaves us kind of waiting. I guess it's kind of a draw. All right. NBC News political analyst, former U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill, always on time, even on Central Time. But here she is with us on the East Coast. Host of Pablo Torre Finds Out on Meadowlark Media, MSNBC contributor Pablo Torre, White House correspondent for Reuters, Jeff Mason. A lot to talk to Jeff about today. Yeah. Thank you for coming in. Okay. And speaking of a lot to talk about, she doesn't stop working because the legal news doesn't stop coming. MSNBC legal correspondent and former litigator Lisa Rubin is here. So let's get right to it. Remember, this is a fun show, right?
Absolutely. Mika.
Yeah. Except our new brand is nothing about this is fun, right? At least that's what we were saying the other day. Nothing about this is fun, but we're muddling through as best we can. The federal judge overseeing the Alien Enemies Act case says he has found probable cause to hold the Trump administration in contempt of court. In a new filing yesterday, Judge James Boasberg said the White House actions demonstrate a willful disregard of the court's order. He added, the court does not reach such conclusion lightly or hastily. Indeed, it has given defendants ample opportunity to rectify or explain their actions. None of their responses have been satisfactory. Last month, at an emergency hearing, Judge Boasberg ordered the Department of Justice to turn around planes heading to El Salvador with hundreds of alleged Venezuelan gang members on board, no one getting the process that they should have had to be put on a flight such as this or leave the country, thrown out. The flights did not return to the U.S. as ordered. The Justice Department stonewalled Boasberg from learning additional details about the timing of the flights. Judge Boasberg says he will give the government a chance to remedy the situation, but if it doesn't, he'll proceed to identify the people in contempt and refer the matter for prosecution. I'm going to go to Claire. You can take it to Lisa, the two legal minds at the table here. I guess, first of all, what has always been a little bit troubling to me in the coverage of the Abrego Garcia story is that that is a horrific story, and it absolutely, I guess on a political level, might actually move the meter a little bit. It gives a name, a face, a family to this incredible story of our laws being pushed to the limit or maybe even broken. And at the same time, all these other deportations, Claire, in a way, calling Abrego Garcia a mistake is sort of giving subversive validation to these other deportees. All of their cases are legally questionable as well. And they continue. These flights continue. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that what this administration is doing, it is deciding that it's okay to be lawless. You know, keep in mind, there are ways to deport people in this country legally. And they have all kinds of ways they can, in fact, make these deportations go more quickly. But the things they're doing now, many of them are really running afoul of the majority of what America thinks. I don't think the majority of America thinks that you should revoke all the student visas of foreign students without any kind of rhyme or reason other than that they may have a different opinion than you do. I don't think, frankly, they think that someone who's lived in this country and has children and is married and has never broken the law should be deported, especially if they've been here for a decade or longer. That's not what America thinks. In fact, polling backs me up on this.
Yeah.
So if they really want to deport folks, then all they've got to do is use the law to do it.
Deport folks.
Yeah. And I don't think, most Americans think criminals that are here illegally should be deported. Focus on that and quit doing this lawless stuff that, frankly, they're going to lose a big chunk, especially of independent voters.
And let me just jump in. If you guys could pull up the Hillary Clinton, she posted, I believe on Blue Sky or Instagram yesterday. I'm going to read that. Go back to you, and you can take it to Lisa. You'll have a way better question than me because you guys are deep into this and understanding of the law. But Trump TV will tell you that, oh, the lefties on MSNBC, the Democrats, they don't want gang members to be thrown out of this country. Listen to them. That is not what we're saying. Just FYI, everybody wants criminals and gang members to be put into jail or put in a situation where they can't hurt people again. We're all with you there. You can't say that because you're lying when you do. What we are saying is that people deserve the process that is due to them, whether they are illegal immigrants or American citizens. And none of these people received any of that. And many of these people are being defamed by Trump TV, defamed by the president, defamed by Pam Bondi, defamed and being labeled things that they may not be. And in the case of Abrego Garcia, they're taking a baseball hat, and saying he's a terrorist because he's wearing a baseball hat. Who's crazy? Okay, so back to the Hillary Clinton post, Claire. She put this up. I don't know if it was yesterday, but it came my way. Before the election, I warned that there's no safe haven under authoritarianism. If they can ship Kilmar Abrego Garcia to a foreign prison accused of no crime with no trial, they can do it to anyone. Americans of conscience must stand against this now. And, you know, the hope is, Claire, that there is a groundswell of support for our country, in this country, for our Constitution.
Absolutely. And speaking of the Constitution, this fire hose of legal cases that I'm sure you've got some giant spreadsheet in your head, Lisa, but there are so many cases that are careening towards the ultimate showdown in the Supreme Court. How quickly will this Boasberg decision get to the Supreme Court, if at all?
I think there's a possibility that not this particular decision, but something stemming from it, Claire, is going to end up at the Supreme Court. Ultimately, right now, all we have is a decision saying that he's found probable cause that there is not just contempt, Mika, but criminal contempt. And I want to play out what that means. There are lots of different forms of judicial contempt, as Claire knows. Usually what happens in a case is you start from civil contempt, which is a fine, and then it might escalate if the disobedience continues. Here, Boasberg has found that there's probable cause already to find that there's criminal contempt, and he's given the government two choices. And the choices are, by April 23rd, a week from yesterday, you do one of two things. You either purge the contempt, or you identify the people who are responsible for having made the decision not to turn the first two of the three planes that left on March 15th around. Now, Mr. Abrego Garcia is on the third of those planes. Somewhere north of 100 alleged members of Tren de Aragua are on the first two. But I want to underscore for our viewers how easy it would be to purge the contempt and what it means to cure it. Because it's not that he's telling them, release all of these people from an El Salvadoran prison. All he's saying to them is, he says this directly, I'm going to read from the order. Per the terms of the TRO, meaning his own temporary restraining order, the government would not need to release any of those individuals, nor would it need to transport them back to the homeland, meaning the United States. All they have to do is retake custody of these people, put them back in U.S. hands, assure that their rights are being respected, as opposed to placing them in a notorious Salvadoran prison that looks more like a concentration camp than it does anything resembling an American prison that I've been to see clients in, for example, Clara, you might have visited in your capacity as a law enforcement officer at some point in time. That is really startling, I think, because I don't think people appreciate that's all the government needs to do here to resolve this issue that could lead to a showdown with the court. The other thing I want to underscore is that if we get to a point where the government says, okay, we're going to identify people, and Mika, you mentioned that he could appoint a prosecutor. There are going to be people on the right who say this is further proof that he is just lawless. He meaning Judge Boasberg. Yeah. And there is ample precedent for doing so. The federal rules of criminal procedure require that in a situation of criminal contempt, first you refer it to the Department of Justice. And if the Department of Justice says, no, we don't think a crime was committed here, the judge has every right to choose a lawyer of his or her own choosing to basically stand in the shoes of the government and prosecute a criminal contempt. And it's happened before. It's happened here in New York. There's a sort of infamous environmental lawyer named Stephen Donziger who served a term in prison for exactly this, for criminal contempt, where there was a civil litigation. He was referred by a judge here in the Southern District. That case went up to the Supreme Court after his conviction was affirmed by an appeals court. And guess what? The Supreme Court did nothing to rescue him from that. So in the event that we get to a place where there is a finding of criminal contempt, because there was a prosecutor appointed, make no mistake, we've seen that movie before. It won't be something wholly novel to this country.
All right, well, and we continue now. The Trump administration yesterday, as I mentioned, released new documents in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Attorney General Pam Bondi took to social media to post his 2019 immigration court records. After weeks of pressure on the government to prove its contention that Abrego Garcia was a gang member, the documents describe how police officers in Maryland approached Abrego Garcia along with 3 other people for loitering at a Home Depot parking lot. Officials say he was wearing a Chicago Bulls hat, it's basketball, but baseball hat, and a hoodie with markings that were allegedly indicative of Hispanic gang culture and symbolizes a, quote, member in good standing. At the time of his arrest, Abrego Garcia had no criminal history. The Department of Homeland Security also released records that said he was detained in connection to a 2019 murder investigation. Abrego Garcia denied he was ever involved and was never charged. DHS also released more documents revealing that Abrego Garcia's wife sought a temporary protective order against him in 2021. She says at the time it was out of abundance of caution and the couple had worked through their issues. A month later, the case was dismissed. In a statement about the incident, his wife wrote in part, "No one is perfect, and no marriage is perfect. That is not a justification for ICE's action of abducting him and deporting him to a country where he was supposed to be protected from deportation." White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt doubled down on the administration's stance, stating that Abrego Garcia will never live in the U.S. again. As far as his current condition, DHS says there are no further updates. And it's not just those on the left calling for due process here. We've heard from the editors at the National Review, the Wall Street Journal editorial board, Fox News contributor Andy McCarthy, Joe Rogan, all speaking out for due process, however that turns out, but due process. And Fox News host and former Republican Congressman and federal prosecutor Trey Gowdy yesterday criticized the Trump administration for how it's handling the Supreme Court order to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the U.S. Take a look.
I mean, I think what they ought to do is probably follow the judge's order and the Supreme Court decision, which used the word facilitate. Also in that opinion, Martha, were the words accidental, mistake, and illegal. I mean, those are not three good words you want in a Supreme Court decision. If the president doesn't agree with that, and he may not, then bring him back and then remove him to another country, appeal the removal order. But what we can't have is any executive disobeying or not following a judge's decision, even if you disagree with it.
So a few voices there, which is something, Pablo, and also we're seeing a smattering of voices in some of these town halls, where maybe even red state Americans might say, hey, can we just do things the right way?
Yeah, I want to be clear about something, Mika. Right now, what Trump TV, as you put it, is doing is asking you to look at an ink blot test, and they're saying, what do you see? Here are the details. Here's a man never charged with a crime, but he's had problems in his marriage, but he was found in this parking lot with alleged gang-affiliated caps, hoodies, that stuff. And what I want to make clear is that you actually don't need to respect Kilmar Abrego Garcia as a man in order to come to a clear conclusion on this matter. Right. It's whether you respect the law.
Right.
It's not about whether he's a good guy. It's about whether the process, the system, the rule of law is worthy of protection, even when it's an unpopular person, even if it's not an ambiguous ink blot, even when it's a guy you clearly think, I don't want that person living next to me in my neighborhood, even if I grant you that.
It's why I read Hillary Clinton's post.
And it's why
that's what this is about.
And it's why we're seeing a coalition of people at the Wall Street Journal, serious conservative thinkers, say to themselves, this is beyond the pale. And when we say deportation, I also want to make clear as well, one more thing. We're talking about an El Salvadorian concentration camp, a prison camp, a terrorist holding facility run by a guy who calls himself the world's coolest dictator. And I have to keep on stressing that, because we're making a choice about whether we care about how America figures out whether someone is worthy of punishment or not. And you do that, as we've established now, through the legal system, and that's what we're not doing by indulging Bukele and Trump.
I think you are actually paring it down to, this is really good, because the question for Americans is it okay with you that hundreds of men, allegedly, but no one's giving the due process, the proof, the court proceeding, accused of crimes by members of the administration, by people on television, John Heilman. I just wonder if there are political consequences to this when you take a group of people and remove them and send them to a prison that is pretty much like a concentration camp, where some of them probably won't come out alive or will never see the light of day. Are Americans okay with that? And are they okay with going a step further, which is what Donald Trump is talking about? And we, of course, remind our viewers who were all there during the election, he said he wanted to do tariffs. He's doing tariffs. He said he wanted to do mass deportations. He's trying. The numbers are tough to meet. So, you know, it's not like we should be surprised, but will Americans be okay with what is happening here before it grows into something else, which Trump is telling us about?
Well, Mika, I wish I had the crystal ball here on what Americans will or won't be okay with. We have so many of these things we're seeing are things we've never seen before, and we don't really have any precedent to make any judgment about it. I would say there are a lot of Americans who, in the abstract, do not care about due process. There are a lot of Americans who are fine with the notion if all they're presented with is the notion of bad guy, gang member, criminal, they don't particularly mind. I'm not speaking for myself here, but they don't particularly mind if they're sent out of the country. I don't think they particularly mind if they're given due process. I don't think they particularly mind if they're sent to a brutal gulag concentration camp level facility in El Salvador. I'm afraid the matter is that there are a lot of Americans who don't care about that. There are also a lot of Americans who do. This is what we have a very, very divided country, and there are there's a great split about this, and the arguments in favor of civil liberties, due process, have not been clear-cut political winners over the course of recent American history. However, here's what I think a lot of Americans do. Overwhelmingly, to Claire's point about what the polling suggests, I don't think that a lot of Americans support the notion of people who have been living in the country under any immigration status, who've been here for a long time, who have not been convicted of crimes, who've not been charged of crimes, who have held down jobs, who have families, who are married in some cases, as is the case with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, married to an American citizen. There is an overwhelming body of data that shows that most Americans are not in favor of those people being sent anywhere, not just to a gulag, but being deported even from the country at all. And further, and finally, I will say that the other thing that I think that a lot of Americans instinctively find problematic is the notion that Donald Trump or any president would stand up on a routine basis and say, I am the law, and court orders are not for me. 9-0 decisions by the Supreme Court, go pound sand, Supreme Court, flipping the middle finger to the Supreme Court and to all the lower courts, I think is a thing that gives a lot of Americans a lot of pause, and you're starting to see that is a thing that you're starting to pop up in some of these town hall meetings where Americans are just kind of like, I don't want. I can't really necessarily tell you my theory of government, but I like the fact that we have a few branches that kind of balance each other out, and they don't like the idea of having an all-powerful executive.
Well, Halman, it's like the guy at the Grassley Town Hall who said, you know, if I get a $1,200 ticket and I don't pay it, does that stand up? I mean, that's bringing it down to how it impacts everyday Americans' lives. So, Jeff, what's your reporter's mind? What stands out to you there's these two stories that are really converging. It's the bigger story of all the deportations that took place, the gauzy video that was made of these people being treated like animals, chained, and dragged out of the country and thrown into a gulag. This is America 2025, and then down to the one story, I guess the face of the story, which is Mr. Garcia.
Yeah, so I'm a White House reporter, so I'm going to look at it from my sort of wheelhouse, which is politics. And I think there's a political aspect to this and there's a legal aspect to this, which you're much better at talking about. But I'll start with the legal piece, which is I think many people are seeing the beginning of or the potential for a constitutional crisis because of the Trump administration and the president's willingness to basically challenge the courts and to challenge these court rulings. I asked the president last weekend, I was traveling with him to Florida, if he would respect the Supreme Court, its decision or with the Supreme Court's order to facilitate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia. And he said, if the Supreme Court says we have to return him, we'll return him. And then I said, well, what about the lower courts? And he wouldn't engage on that. Right. So I think, and the president has said multiple times that he will respect the Supreme Court. I think he does respect the Supreme Court. But I think he's also very willing to see this and every other battle that he's fighting happening right now go all the way up to the Supreme Court. On the political side, the fact, and I was glad you played or you mentioned what Caroline Leavitt said yesterday, I think they're clearly feeling the heat, because the fact that yesterday she brought out a mother whose daughter had died, was killed brutally by a person who was here illegally. She's trying, with that kind of move, to say, as you said earlier, Democrats, the media, everyone is pushing for this man to come back. Why aren't you looking over here? Those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I think that's showing that they're beginning to feel a little bit of political pressure.
Yeah. Lisa, where is this going next? What should we be watching for?
I think you should circle April 23rd on your calendar. It's the date where not only do the Department of Justice and many of the defendants owe an answer to Judge Boasberg, but it's also the date where the judge in the Abrego Garcia case has said, plaintiffs, that's your deadline for your first depositions. She's already told them, as she barrels toward a contempt hearing of her own, you can take 4 depositions of the 4 people who have put declarations sworn under oath in my court, refusing to really give me the information that I've required about this man's whereabouts and what efforts the government has taken to return him. So April 23rd is going to be a big day. Mika, I just want to add one more thing about the constitutional crisis that some people feel is impending. I interviewed a law professor at Columbia yesterday, Jamal Greene. He's an expert in constitutional law. And I asked him, when do you see this constitutional crisis coming? And he said, we're already there. Because most of what happens in this country in terms of our fidelity to the Constitution never happens in a court of law. It happens behind the scenes. And what determines whether or not we are faithful to the Constitution is largely behind closed doors in terms of the executive branch's willingness to monitor themselves, to hold themselves back. He said, we hit that constitutional crisis on day 1 with the Birthright Citizenship Executive Order and all of the executive orders that followed, including the one on February 20th that named a number of these gangs foreign terrorist organizations that set into motion the events that we're all talking about right here and now.
I would also add that it's not hyperbole to raise questions about whether the administration would do this to American citizens, because he has floated it himself.
Right.
Yes.
So that is not just a made-up threat. That's something that's quoting the President of the United States.
Yep. So we have a piece that we're going to read from Ed Luce coming up that really plays into what you're saying here. MSNBC legal correspondent and host of Can They Do That? On YouTube, Lisa Rubin. Thank you so much for coming on this morning, explaining everything. Still ahead on Morning Joe, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is warning inflation is likely to rise because of President Trump's tariffs. We'll play for you those comments along with his reference to the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Also ahead, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts.
Ferris Bueller once noted, life moves pretty fast. For the time being, we are well positioned to wait for greater clarity before considering any adjustments to our policy stance.
Wow, Jerome Powell yesterday making a Ferris Bueller reference during a speech at the Economic Club of Chicago. The Fed chair is warning President Trump's tariffs could spur a temporary rise in inflation.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects. Tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation. The inflationary effects could also be more persistent. Avoiding that outcome will depend on the size of the effects, on how long it takes for them to pass through fully to prices, and ultimately on keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored.
Powell's comments triggered a market sell-off, and all 3 indexes ended the day in the red. Let's bring in former Treasury official and Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratner. You've got some charts for us, but first, what do you make of the Fed chair's comments?
It was an important speech because, because the Fed chairman had been pretty quiet about all this tariff stuff and what the impact was likely to be. The market's been wondering because, as we've talked about many, many times on this show, tariffs are inflationary. They're also, I don't want to say recessionary, but a drag on economic growth because higher inflation means people buy less and the economy slows down and so forth. And so the Fed is sort of between a rock and a hard place. So you remember that the Fed's goal, and they've been very, very clear and explicit about it, is 2% inflation. Inflation's been running about 3%. Powell keeps reiterating 2% inflation, but now you have an economy that's slowing down. And so the question is the Fed going to try to help? And market, as I said, has been wondering about this. I think what you heard yesterday is one thing that we know, which is a very tough and difficult decision for the Fed. What do they actually do? And I think, as the lead-in said, the market took it as a hawkish sign that the Fed was going to be tough on inflation. And so the market went down because high interest rates are the enemy of the stock market, basically.
So we're going to get to your charts in just a moment. But Claire, Trump posted yesterday, I guess he didn't like Powell's speech. He posted that this morning, among other things, he says there, Powell's termination cannot come fast enough. But nobody likes these. Who likes these tariffs except for Steve Miller? Is there one other guy, Lutnick, and Donald Trump? I mean, who's in support of what is happening to the nation's economy right now?
Peter Navarro.
Peter Navarro.
Navarro loves
you got me.
But Elon Musk says he's dumb as a brick.
I mean, I haven't seen Elon Musk in a while, and we're going to talk maybe about why in just a moment.
But can I just say one quick thing before Claire, because this is really important.
Okay.
This is really important, which is when Trump says he hates Powell, the question is, what does he want? Does he want someone who's just going to cut interest rates, which is what he's implied, which would be really bad for inflation, which we are now committed to getting back to 2%? And so, sorry, Claire, but I just want to make that point.
Listen, the thing about his speech yesterday that struck me is that he's waiting for clarity. Well, that's like saying I'm going to see the real Easter Bunny on Sunday, because this administration is specializing in chaos.
Right, in lack of clarity.
And the one thing that Trump is learning, and if he were to try to get rid of Powell, that would just be more chaotic. That would be more damaging in terms of what it would mean to our economy. So he can bully a lot of people. He can try to bully news outlets. He can try to bully universities. He's obviously successfully bullied some of the largest, most successful law firms in the country, brought them to their knees like little baby cowards they are. Yeah. But he can't bully investors. He can't say to the rest of the world, you can trust us now, when they can see with their own eyes they can't.
Right.
So he's really, Trump is, and he will be captured by the stock market in terms of his political popularity. People like to say, well, only rich people have stocks. There is a huge number of people whose 401s, especially people near retirement, they're dwindling in front of their very eyes, and they are in a state of panic about this. So politically, Donald Trump has a problem because he can't control investors that are turning their back on the United States bonds.
Okay, I just have to make one clarification for our viewers. I know that we have been on the air for 18 years now, and people say, I grew up watching you. So I know that there are children watching, and Claire's wrong. The Easter Bunny is very real, and you're going to get lots of eggs, and they're going to have little treats inside.
My daughter, if she's awake right now, Violet, don't listen to Claire McCaskill.
It's going to be okay.
That is fake news. That part is fake news.
First of all, if your child that believes in the Easter Bunny is watching this program,
because the parents are watching.
Well, I guess that's true. I guess it's possible.
We're back.
Leave the demo, Claire.
I have 16 grandchildren. So I should know better.
I grew up watching Morning Joe. I think Pablo actually said that to me, which really hurt me.
Yikes.
Still paying the price for that bit of actuarial honesty.
Pablo. Jeff, I know you're leaving, so final word here. Easter Bunny, go.
Well, I was going to say final word politics, although I'm sure we can bring the Easter Bunny into that too. President Trump, as a candidate, promised to bring down inflation. And that was one of the key things that he promised as a presidential candidate. He also promised to bring on tariffs, and as you said earlier, everything he's doing are things that he has given people a heads up about.
Yes.
But those two things are colliding, and the politics will come to collide as well, I think, pretty quickly if those prices do not come down.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's promised a lot of these things that are happening, and that's why it can't be shocked, but it still can be deeply troubling. White House correspondent for Reuters, Jeff Mason, thank you very much. We're going to get to Steve's charts after a break, but let's take a moment to take a look at some of the other stories making headlines this morning. Puerto Rico is in the middle of an island-wide blackout. More than 1.4 million people lost electricity yesterday afternoon. Officials say a problem near a transmission line knocked out service to the island's power plants. It's expected to take up to 72 hours to fully restore the power. All the hospitals are now operating under generators. The Trump administration is changing its policy about which news outlets cover the president each day. Wire services, which usually include the Associated Press, Bloomberg News, and Reuters, will no longer have a permanent place in the White House daily press pool. They'll be now placed in a larger rotation with roughly 30 other newspapers and print outlets. Jeff, just quick, chime in.
Just that it's a blow to keeping independent news reporters and agencies in the pool. It affects my company, it affects me, and it affects the ability for people who are straight down the middle reporters to ask questions that are important to the president.
The Associated Press claims this violates a court order that says the administration does not have sole discretion on who gets to ask the president questions. Of course, we'll be following that. And NASA's James Webb telescope has detected a potential hint of life on a planet that's 124 light years away. Researchers say the telescope found signs of a molecule that on Earth has only one known source: simple organisms such as marine algae. Early observations also suggest the planet's atmosphere is consistent with the presence of a global ocean. More evidence still needs to be collected. Maybe I can't do it. I shouldn't do it. I was going to say maybe the ladies of Blue Origin should go check it out.
I feel like there are enough simple organisms here on Earth, Mika. I feel like
I think I'm with Priceline. I'm with Shatner. I'm with Shatner.
Oh, yeah.
Captain Kirk. Read Shatner's.
America needed us most.
Musk continues his work with the Department of Government Efficiency. He has not spoken much about his company, Tesla. As new data shows, its electronic vehicle, well, the sales fell almost 9% in the first 3 months of 2025. What could be behind that? Steve Ratner has made his way over to the southwest wall with his charts. Let's start with Tesla. What's going on there, Steve?
Yeah, Mika, as you said, Tesla has actually hit a bit of a bump in the road, no pun intended. But you can see here that Tesla in its early years had huge sales increases, as you would expect, very popular, one of the few makers of really good electric vehicles in the country. But beginning in 2025, its sales kind of stagnated. Combination of really two reasons. One, some competition, more competition from other people trying to get in the business, including domestic manufacturers. And also the fact that people are getting their models Y and S, two of their most popular models, getting a little bit long in the tooth, so to speak. But look what happened here in the first quarter. In the first quarter, their sales went down 13%, more than they've ever done before. And that's across the world. If you look at just the U.S., you can see that all U.S. EV sales are actually up 11%, and Tesla was down 9%. And so what I think you are starting to see, and I'll get to this a bit more in a second, you are starting to see Musk's unpopularity weigh on Tesla's sales. Some of it is expected. Their market share, when you start with a very, very high market share, really only one way to go. And as I said, other people are making them. But look what happened in Europe in the first quarter. In Europe, their market share dropped enormously. And this, I do think, is heavily related to the unpopularity of both American products, frankly, as well as Elon Musk in Europe.
Interesting. And so Tesla tanking, what's the reason behind it?
So, yes, you can see the Tesla stock was back in September, October was down here. It had this, when Trump was elected, it took this huge run up because people thought that Musk was simply going to be a great beneficiary of the federal government's largesse. And then you can see that along with all the chaos and commotion and Trump's own personal issues, you can see Tesla stock's gone all the way back down. But Morgan Stanley did a survey, and they found that 85% of investors think that Musk's political activities are going to have a negative impact on Tesla's business fundamentals. And so, again, I think the market is starting to say that Musk is becoming too hot to handle, so to speak. But one other point about Musk that's worth making, which is that for all his talk about being anti-government, anti-government programs and things like that, Tesla has been an unbelievable beneficiary of government largesse. And so this is year by year. You can see here. The biggest piece of all of this, about $1.7 billion, are electric vehicle credits that Tesla sells to other automakers who are forced to comply with our electric vehicle and our fuel emission standards. So ironically, a program that Trump has talked about killing is one of the ones that Musk has been the biggest beneficiary of.
So let's just talk about Musk overall and Doge. I mean, the promises were, I don't know, target cutting $150 billion, $2 trillion annually from the budget. I mean, they went in there, a bunch of people, with, I believe, no clearance, no cabinet position. So there's those issues and those questions that have a lot of us wondering. But okay, so what's been the outcome of these grand projections?
So yeah, as you said, there's been an enormous amount of commotion. You've had a bunch of people lose their jobs. You've had confusion all over the place. What do we have to show for it? Well, back during the campaign, Trump claimed that he was going to cut $2 trillion from our annual budget. And by the way, our annual budget is $7 trillion. So you're talking, he would have been talking obviously about a massive, massive cut. They quickly realized that was not successful. In January, they said we'll cut $1 trillion out of the budget. And by the way, the government's fiscal year is now more than half over anyway. But then on April 10th, they lowered it to $150 billion. So $2 trillion, $1 trillion, $150. But even the $150 billion, the New York Times did a very thorough investigation of this. $92 billion of it is unspecified. Nobody knows where that's coming from. Of the other $63 billion, there were all kinds of mistakes, including, for example, a contract for $1.9 billion they claim credit for actually canceled during the Biden administration. So for all the commotion, all the layoffs, all the unhappy people, there's very little to show for it. You can see that most clearly over here because this tracks federal spending month by month since the beginning of each year back from 2022. And as you would expect, it went up a little bit in 23, a little bit in 24, but it's actually gone up a good bit in 25. So there's still no impact whatsoever on government spending from all of, as I said, the commotion that Musk has created in Washington.
Wow. Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratner, thank you very much for coming on this morning. And John Hallman, your thoughts on how Doge is doing?
Well, Mika, to Steve's point, I think some of us said from the very beginning that given the composition of the federal government and the federal budget, given how much of that goes to the big entitlement programs and defense spending, that you were not going to have much of an impact on the budget unless you started to take on some of those large programs. And so Elon Musk, he put his hand on the hot stove when he took on some of those large programs. And so Elon Musk, he put his hand on the hot stove when he talked about how Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. People immediately bridled at that. That became a political liability for the Trump team. And, you know, Elon Musk made himself, as you'll remember, the face of that Wisconsin judicial election. He took a drubbing there. There's now been a lot of data that's looked at that election that showed that for all the money that he spent on that conservative judicial Supreme Court candidate, that he actually hurt the candidate more than he helped the candidate. And the Trump administration very quickly has been kind of ditching Musk and decoupling itself from Musk because he's become so unpopular. And just to get back to one thing Steve was saying a second ago, I am not a stock market analyst, but I'll tell you, when a thing starts to have a name out in America, Tesla regret syndrome, people are out there in the world right now peeling the Tesla not the logo, but the little symbol that they have on the car. People who own those cars are now going to places to have the Tesla symbol removed and replaced with an Audi symbol or a Toyota symbol or something else because people are now embarrassed, have buyer's remorse over driving Teslas around. That cannot be good for business, Mika.
Yeah, that's, better than other things that have been happening.
Can we talk about his legions of children in the Wall Street Journal expose? Please, please.
God.
That he's DMing women on Twitter and saying, have my baby.
What
and
is
giving
that?
them his sperm.
Oh.
And then he told one of the women, this killed me. But more importantly, he is a weirdo.
Yeah.
He is a weirdo.
Like
and
the
party of family values and moral majority. And he's got a harem, and he wants to call his children a legion. We don't even know how many kids he has.
That's
with how
my
many
favorite
women.
part is that
He pays them to be quiet.
The reporting can't even bracket the reasonable range of how many
kids he has.
progeny.
With who?
And with who.
It's important that we point out this is reporting from the Wall Street
Wall
Journal.
Street Journal.
Yes.
We're not talking about.
Well, it's such an important detail, Mika, that when we reference these stories, it's not just the people at this desk.
Yeah.
It is data, empirics, conservative leaning traditionally when it comes to the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, like outlets that really are just saying this, to Claire's point, is just profoundly weird.
Yeah, and disturbing. And how is he in on everybody's private information without any clearance? I'll go back to that.
But he's paying people to make sure his information is private.
Okay, that's just all, doesn't seem good. John Hellman, thank you very much. Still ahead on Morning Joe, we're going to turn to some medical news now, where the CDC is now reporting a rise in autism in school-aged children. We're going to break down those new findings. Plus, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren will join the conversation on the economy, how President Trump's tariffs policies are impacting her state, and much more. Morning Joe will be right back.
Never pay taxes. They'll never hold a job. They'll never play baseball. They'll never write a poem. They'll never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. And we have to recognize we are doing this to our children, and we need to put an end to it.
That was HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. yesterday discussing a new CDC report detailing a rise in autism among children. According to the agency, about 1 in 31 kids were diagnosed with the disorder by their 8th birthday in 2022. That is nearly 5 times the figure in 2000. Joining us now, physician and senior public health contributor for Forbes, Dr. Omer Awan. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Let's start there. Why are we seeing this uptick? Sometimes is better reporting, but is there something else?
Well, the diagnostic criteria for autism has brought in significantly, and this has allowed for many more milder cases of autism to be classified under the umbrella term autism spectrum disorder. And the other thing about this, Mika, is that physicians and pediatricians in particular are doing a much better job screening for autism. So you go to a pediatric office and you'll get good questions about exactly social interactions, learning, and this has allowed many more children to eventually be diagnosed with autism.
So I want to there's a lot of interesting health news to get to here with you. Fluoride in the water and this new information about CT scans. So, but let's move to fluoride, which we have in our water for a reason. RFK Jr. says he plans to tell the CDC to stop recommending fluoride in drinking water. Will this happen? And what will be the consequences?
Well, it could absolutely happen because in Utah already they've banned fluoride in drinking water, and this, Mika, could really have devastating consequences for public health and oral health in particular. The American Dental Association has said that fluoride in public water decreases tooth decay and cavities by 25% in both children and adults. And when we consider this, this is really going to be devastating because remember, 70 million Americans lack dental insurance. This is going to cause a huge uptick in cavities, and this may cost the federal government.
Why is he doing it?
He believes that it could be harmful, and certainly at the concentrations that we see, it is not harmful. And decades of research has shown that at the concentration of 0.7 milligrams per liter, we don't see harm. But when it's at higher concentrations, like 2 milligrams, 4 milligrams, it can cause certain adverse effects like tooth discoloration, even bony abnormalities. But the research has shown that that doesn't occur at the concentration that currently exists.
This is in tap water, fluoride, public drinking. A lot of people drink bottled water in plastic bottles. Does that have fluoride in it?
It does, yeah, it does. Certainly, anything that has spring water, anything that comes from a public source has fluoride in it. And this has saved many people, probably yourself and myself, from getting cavities. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens next.
All right, there's also been a study that is highlighting increased cancer risk from CT scans. Tell us what the findings were, and where do we go from here? A lot of people really depend on them.
Absolutely. Well, I think the important thing to remember about this study is that it was based on statistical modeling and not real patient outcomes. And what the study did was it showed that, CT scans, which have ballooned significantly, more than 90 million CT scans are done yearly, can result in 5% of all cancers in America. Now, remember also, CT scans are very important. I mean, they're critical in saving lives and detecting cancers earlier. They're critical in, decreasing hospital stays for people that are in the hospital. And even, they prevent, invasive procedures from happening, and that has risks in itself.
Yeah.
But with that said, there is a harm from radiation from CT scans. People, the more CT scans you have, the more radiation you're going to cumulatively get. And then you can also have an increased risk of having cancer in the future.
We got to go, but on a scale of 1 to 10, RFK as HHS secretary has you how concerned, 10 being the highest?
10.
Yeah.
10.
Physician and senior public health contributor for Forbes, Dr. Omer Awan, thank you very much for coming on this morning. Come back. And coming up, the Fighting Oligarchy Tour continues to draw huge crowds in deep red states. The question is, how can Democrats capitalize on this enthusiasm? We'll dig into that. Plus, straight ahead, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts is standing by. She joins us live in studio. But first, a federal judge at the top of the hour here says he has found probable cause to hold the Trump administration in contempt of court over its deportation policies. NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has the latest.
With immigration arrests like these playing out across the country, a federal judge now says the Trump administration is crossing a line with its mass deportations. After those controversial removal flights to El Salvador last month, Judge James Boasberg slamming the government for failing to comply with his court order to temporarily halt the planes, writing, "Probable cause exists to find the government in criminal contempt."
The idea that one branch of government would ignore the orders of another is something we haven't seen in our nation's history.
The judge writing, "The Constitution does not tolerate willful disobedience of judicial orders," adding that disobedience would make a solemn mockery of the Constitution itself. The White House says it will appeal. A separate legal case involves one of those deportees, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man the Justice Department initially acknowledged was mistakenly sent to El Salvador. The Supreme Court ruled the Trump administration should facilitate Abrego Garcia's return to the U.S. After days of requests, the administration released a document from 2019 stating how an informant allegedly identified Abrego Garcia as a member of the violent gang MS-13, even giving his rank and nickname.
When Kilmar Abrego Garcia was originally arrested, he was wearing a sweatshirt with rolls of money covering the ears, mouth, and eyes of presidents on various currency denominations. This is a known MS-13 gang symbol.
Abrego Garcia's family denies he's a gang member, and he's never been criminally convicted. Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland went to El Salvador to push for Abrego Garcia's release, but was denied a meeting with him.
This is about due process. This is about not letting people be just whisked off the street, which the Trump administration admits was done in error.
The White House highlighting the story of Patty Morin, whose daughter Rachel was killed by an undocumented immigrant.
These are the kind of criminals President Trump wants to remove from our country.
The Trump administration is promising deportations will ramp up. Outside Boston, the woman inside this car says ICE officers used a hammer to break a window in order to drag out her husband, an undocumented immigrant who has no criminal record. This surveillance video shows plainclothes officers tackling a Venezuelan man as he arrives in a New Hampshire courthouse, knocking over another man in the process.
Hey, excuse me.
Outrage over immigration now spilling into contentious town halls, including one held by Chuck Grassley, the most powerful senator on the Judiciary Committee.
Are you going to bring that guy back from El Salvador? Yeah. Why not?
Well, because that's not a power of Congress.
Supreme Court said to bring him back.
While in Georgia, police tasered 2 protesters at an event held by Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Bye. Just like that illegal alien. Bye.
Oh, my goodness gracious. That was NBC's Gabe Gutierrez reporting. That was harsh to watch her like that. Marjorie Taylor Greene with us here at the table, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. She is the ranking member of the Banking Committee, a member of the Armed Services Committee. Also joining the conversation, we have MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle, the host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitale, AOC contributor Pablo Torre and Claire McCaskill, former senator, still with us as well, which is great because we have Senator Elizabeth Warren with us, and I would like to get that conversation going between you two, especially about the tariffs. But first, I would like to ask about these deportations. We were just watching the White House continue to double down on this one specific case, Mr. Abrego Garcia, and to an extent really trying to label him a terrorist. But all the others are legally questionable as well. Your thoughts?
But the point is, why are they doing this?
Right.
And the answer is they want to have the American people say it's okay to just disappear people.
Right.
And somehow they think if they can make up lies about him, if they can do whatever they want, then the answer will be the American people will settle for this. We do not disappear people in the United States. Because here's the thing. If they can disappear Mr. Abrego Garcia, then they can disappear you.
And you want to know who else who says that? Hillary Clinton, who posted that this is real. Yeah. She was sounding the alarm long before the election about his promises that he is following through on before the election. I warned that there is no safe haven under authoritarianism. If they can ship Kilmar Abrego Garcia to a foreign prison, a gulag, really, accused of no crime with no trial, they can do it to anyone. Americans of conscience must stand against this now. Do you think this will break through, Senator?
So I think it is breaking through. I think there are just places where Americans say enough of this. When Chuck Grassley goes out to a town hall, and people are just saying in the town hall, wait a minute, what's going on here? And now it's both halves. It's about disappearing people, but it's also about obeying court orders.
Right.
And, you know, we have these pieces. We all learn them in 10th grade history, and we know what the pieces are supposed to be about how our country works. But now what we've got is truly a man who threatens it, a spineless bunch of Republicans in the House and Senate who help it along. And the American people saying, wait a minute, I think this is the moment we're going to have to start fighting back for our country.
So here's what I've got to pose this question to you, Elizabeth. First of all, it's great to see you.
Good to see you.
Tell all my friends there I said hello.
Will do.
Everywhere I go, what's happened is, as usual, Trump has taken over the media space in a way that is overwhelming. And in that moment, there are millions of Americans that are depressed, frustrated, anxious, very emotional about what's going on. They turn on the news or they open their TikTok and all they see is the Trump stuff. They're not seeing the Democratic counter. And so everywhere I go, people grab me and go, why aren't the Democrats doing more? What's wrong with the Democratic messaging? Why aren't they out there in the streets? What's going on with the Democratic senators and House members? So this is your opportunity. I want you to explain to all the people what you are actually doing and why it is harder than it looks to dominate airspace in light of all the crap that's going on in the Oval Office.
So, you know, let's do Constitutional Law 101. We've got Congress, we're supposed to make the laws, the administration's supposed to administer those laws, the courts are supposed to enforce those laws. A big part of what's going on right now is that we are doubling down on the Constitution. So all the places where Donald Trump is breaking the law, it's in the courts. We've got over 100 lawsuits that are going forward in the courts. That really is the right thing for us to do. Second thing we're doing is we do the things that are appropriate for Congress. So, for example, Donald Trump is out here with the tariffs saying, oh, it's going to be a 57% tariff. It's going to be a 10% tariff. It's going to be a 145% tariff. Markets are doing this. Where does he get the power to do that? That's supposed to be with Congress. Well, the power he's using is an emergency authority that says specifically, Congress, of course, can say, hey, there's no emergency. We're not in an emergency with Belgium. We're not in an emergency with South Korea. Congress can then just roll that back. So I've introduced the bill along with Senator Wyden, and there will be a vote. This is one of those, you know, privileged motion. There will be a vote in the next couple of weeks where every Democrat is ready to roll that authority back from Donald Trump. The question is, can we get some Republicans? But here's the deal, and here's the importance of this. Every Republican will be required to go on the record and to say quite publicly, while things are crashing about them, either they are there only to bow down to Donald Trump, or they are there to stand up for the people who elected them, to stand up for our country. And you just got to force them into those votes.
What do you think the count is? When you got 6 Republicans, maybe 7?
So I think the count is in our favor for a majority. But here's the importance of it. I think it's going to be the crack in the wall.
Yep.
As soon as they start to move, and as soon as you've got more than one moving, 7, after a little bit, starts to look like 17. People don't want to be caught on the wrong side of history. And here's the thing. You know this, Claire. There's a long time when things go wrong, Republicans and Democrats in the elevator, down on the floor of the Senate, back in the cloakroom, they say to each other, we got a little problem here. Now, no one wants to meet your eye, Claire.
Right. Well,
nobody from the Republican side. They
down.
just, it's heads down. And when you say what's happening in the market, it's just heads down.
That's so awkward.
They know. But the point is, they do know and they understand. Look, I have no sympathy here. They are in the box. They want to be a Republican. That is the damn box you've put yourself in. But you're going to have to make a decision. Is it bow down to Trump, or is it stand up for the American people?
Well,
you know, off of Claire's initial question to you, what do the Democrats do when combating what I would call the theater of planned cruelty by the Trump administration? It's no accident in my mind that Mr. Abreu Garcia looks the way he looks and doesn't look the way I look or the way you look. They plan these things and clearly have planned them for quite some time. And it seems to me that there's no really tough, almost gangster-like response from the Democrats about what's going on.
Because ultimately, that's not who we are.
You better step it up then.
Well, but this is the difference. Look, because it's happening everywhere. There is a pattern here. I know it feels like a dust storm, but watch what's happening back in Congress. They're moving forward every step, taking every step to do what? To be able to do giant tax giveaways for billionaires and pay giant tax giveaways for billionaires and pay for it how? On the backs of cutting Social Security, cutting our promises to our veterans, cutting health care for little babies, taking away support for our public schools, for our kids with special needs. They think they can get away with that. Our job is to get out. Here's our secret plan. We'll tell everyone right now, is tell the truth. Because the American people, this is so damned unpopular. I get it. It's not as good theater, but it is unpopular. Why is Chuck Grassley, why is Marjorie Taylor Greene facing people? Why is the Republican leadership in Congress saying, don't go out and do town halls? Because what you're doing is so miserably unpopular that people will scream at you and there'll be video of you running away.
Could you list the number of cancers that might be cured, the number of diseases that might be cured if they don't cut off the funding like the schools of Harvard Public Health?
Yep, I'm ready to do this because this really is, you tell me who is better off for the Trump administration and his co-president Elon Musk to come through with this chainsaw and to cut off cancer research? Are you kidding me? Tuberculosis research? Really? Who is better off? Because those diseases don't just hit Democrats, baby. They hit Democrats, Republicans, and independents. It is the reminder we make these investments because we believe in the dignity of every human being and trying to create opportunity for every one of them. Republicans want to fight us on that. I'm ready. I'm ready for that fight.
Senator, the through line in all of these stories to me, as we debate, is it malice or incompetence? Is that incompetence?
No, I think this one's malice.
But I also most generously want to make the point that even if we grant a certain innocence of intent, incompetence could also be malice. If you're swimming and you're drowning and the lifeguard actually doesn't know how to save you, if you're relying on the Defense Department to not be on a signal group chat, on an economic advisor to have a sense of how this goes for the market. All of that is horrifying. And then I look at these rallies that Bernie Sanders and AOC are staging, and I'm wondering, what do you do with that energy level from that wing of your party in response to people who are feeling malice, incompetence, the pain in a way that is visceral and quite obviously real?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in quite so fast on it, but I feel so strongly about this. You are right. It's malice at every level. You turn someone like Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, loose, metaphorically, with a chainsaw. Here's a man who wants to cut access to Social Security, can't officially do it because you'd have to go to Congress, and Congress isn't going to vote for that, not even with a Republican majority. So what do? They take the end run, and they cut the number of people who work there. They close the offices because that means the number of errors will go up. People who I got contacted my office just the other day. Someone has an adult son with autism, gets a check from Social Security Disability to help take care of him. He just disappeared from the system. How do you get that corrected if there's nobody there on the other end? So cut is what they're trying to do. A man who makes $8 million a day just from his government contracts wants to cut access for people who are making $65 a day on Social Security. So my view on this is people get this. They get it whether they're Democrats, Republicans, or independents. The question you ask is, what are we going to do with this energy? And I think this is the moment. I think the energy is starting to roil. It is starting to boil. For some people, it's going to be Social Security that finally brings them out. For others, it's going to be the attacks on our public schools. For others, it's going to be what they're doing to our Veterans Administration. And the tariffs, remember, they're going to hit everybody because they're going to raise costs, they're going to drive up inflation, and they're going to drive up unemployment.
Yeah.
So this is going to be one of those where what we're really going to see, I do my Constitutional Law 101, but all of it is resting on the foundation of the consent of the people.
Yeah.
And people are starting to say, look, Donald Trump ran for office saying, I will lower your costs on day one. Remember? As soon as he gets elected, first thing he says is the reason I got elected is because I promised to lower costs. 2 months in, he's told about the tariffs that could raise costs for families. And his remark is he, quote, couldn't care less. Well, he's telling people he doesn't care about them. He's not following through on their promises. I think we're starting to feel the energy come back in the other direction. We'll be part of this. There are going to be a lot of different pieces to it, but the energy is there.
Well, so on these tariffs, let's take it a step further, because we're even going to be having a guest on, I think, in our 4th hour, whose business simply can't continue. And this is one story of many. Are there tariffs that Democrats should support to help working families? Is there some way through this?
So there are certainly, tariffs should be a tool in the economic toolbox. There are times to use it, but you use it when you've got a plan, when you actually have a specific goal, when you've worked through what the timing should be, whether or not it will actually be possible to build and make the things that we want to have happen here. But here's the key. What Donald Trump is doing is basically a tariff on every country, everywhere, for everything they sell to the United States. That is a recipe for disaster. And here's partly why. He's not only said he wants tariffs everywhere, it's how big are those tariffs? Well, at one point they were 10%, then they went up, some got 54%, some were at 145%. Then they came back down. Oh, then there was a special exception.
Yeah, which is
for one industry. Oh, but maybe there'll be another if you suck up to Donald Trump or give him enough money. The point is, what that creates is chaos and corruption, and nobody invests in the face of chaos and corruption. Nobody is going to put millions of dollars into building a factory when you need to know the rules like kind of 5 years out, at least generally what they're going to be. With Donald Trump, you don't know them 5 minutes out. So the consequence of that is just his activity is enough to stifle whatever investment and bringing more manufacturing back to the United States there otherwise might have been.
I want to bring in the host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitale, who's also a Capitol Hill reporter. I'm curious, Ali, your thoughts of what you're seeing on Capitol Hill with Republicans, and if they even do eye contact anymore? And you can take a question to Senator Warren.
I think the eye contact with me is different than it is with Senator Warren and Democrats. But I do think that you're right, Senator, when you talk about potential cracks in the dam. Certainly, we are seeing a new willingness to criticize on tariffs. But while we're on the topic of the economy, I want to get your reaction to something that President Trump just posted on social media within the last hour or so. He said of the Fed chair that Jerome Powell's termination cannot come fast enough. His term, of course, isn't over until the spring of 2026. But the president has said he's not going to dismiss him, but he does seem to be intimating there maybe some new willingness to do so. Of course, you've been a thorn in the side of Jerome Powell over the course of the last few hearings, but I wonder your reaction as the president seems to, again, go after the Fed chair for not lowering rates at the rate that he wants them to. And what if the president ultimately does dismiss him?
Look, I have disagreed with Chairman Powell. But something that Chairman Powell and I are in complete agreement on is the independence of the Fed. Donald Trump does not get to tell the Fed what they can and can't do. And you know why Donald Trump is unhappy here? It's because Jerome Powell has said, he gave a speech yesterday, in which he said what Donald Trump is doing with the tariffs is going to drive up prices basically for every single family in America. And he emphasized that these are not modest changes to our economy. These are body blows to our economy. He said that in all of the modeling that the Fed does, where they try different emergency circumstances, they never tried a tariff as high as Donald Trump has announced. And so he's very concerned about what it will do to the economy. And frankly, he is right to be concerned. Wall Street is concerned. All of the economists are concerned. This is a moment when Republicans in Congress are in the last minutes of whether or not we can reel back the damage that Donald Trump is doing and save our nation from a massive recession. And we're going to have a vote on that. Republicans are actually going to have to put their names on the line. Do they want to bow down to Donald Trump, or do they want to stand up and help protect our economy?
We have a few more questions for you. I'm wondering if you could stay for a break. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment with Senator Elizabeth Warren.
We got a very interesting piece of news, which is that some of those Republican members, some of those Republican House members that we had visited, they just led a letter warning the Republican leadership, saying, we don't know if we can vote for Medicaid cuts now. We got them on their back foot. We got them scared. We got them running. But our job is not done. And we will rally every corner of the United States of America until we save Medicaid and Medicare for every American, until we defend Social Security, and we tell them who's really in charge in this country.
Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Independent Senator Bernie Sanders took their fighting oligarchy tour to Montana last night. 9,000 people attended the event in that state that hasn't voted for a Democrat in a presidential election since Bill Clinton in 1992. We're back here with more of our conversation with Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Before we get to you, Pablo, that rally and the price of eggs, go.
Yeah, so look, I think it's building. People, I was just checking the other day, the price of eggs now is $1.20 higher than it was at the highest point during the Biden administration. I think it's just one more way to drive home. Donald Trump promised lower costs on day one, and then 2 months later says when prices are going up, he couldn't care less. And I think what Alex is saying is exactly right in the rally. The things that Elon Musk and Donald Trump are trying to cut, like access to health care for little babies or seniors in nursing homes or Medicare, Medicaid, any of these drive up costs for families. These make it more expensive for families. You can't get your health care at the VA the way you used to, thanks to Elon Musk. That means your costs are a lot higher. You can't get your prescriptions filled. Your costs are a lot higher. People feel that cost pressure, and they are telling Republicans, you don't have to tell the Democrats, we're there. They are telling Republicans, you got to put a stop to this. That's our chance to get a crack in the wall, because understand this, a handful of Republicans switching over and just saying, I'm not voting for this crap. A handful of Republicans doing that, and all of a sudden, Donald Trump, the game changes. And there's a lot more constraint on Donald Trump.
I keep on thinking about the promises that this administration made to get elected. We're going to dismantle the deep state. Well, you guys are the deep state now, and they don't seem to be even satisfying the constituency they have that demanded a radically different approach to that. I think about, of course, the price of eggs and inflation. I think about, in every context, certainly the markets, certainly being a businessman, providing prosperity, these things aren't happening. And so when I think about, okay, what do you do with the opportunity? And I think of those rallies, I think about the messaging of your party, Senator, and I think about billionaires. And I'm wondering how you seize upon that as a sustainable, lasting target. Once the tide goes out on all of the BS that they've been peddling, what's going to be left, and who do you want the American attention to be focused on?
What the Republicans are trying to do this time actually fits on a bumper sticker, and that is billionaires win, everyone else loses. That's exactly what they are pushing. They're pushing it legislatively. They're pushing it through the cuts with Elon Musk. It is the overriding theme, is the billionaires will do fine. And by the way, the billionaires will do fine if the tariffs go up. It's just people who have to buy groceries, who have to pay the rent or the mortgage, who have to buy a car. Those are the ones who are going to suffer. I think this is the moment when we decide either we're handing this country over to a handful of billionaires, and they will run it however they want to run it to help themselves, and everyone else will bow down and pay the price. Or we reaffirm, nope, we are a country that truly does believe we can create opportunity, and everybody gets a chance.
Claire.
So my last question to you, Elizabeth, is what can you tell people that they can do? Because I think there is this frustration, and that's why we're hearing something. The Democrats aren't messaging enough. The Democrats aren't out there enough. There's not enough response.
Or it's over.
Part of it is that people want to look somewhere else for the answers to these problems. So I think it's, I mean, I've been the lucky recipient of an Elizabeth Warren lecture on this is how the cows ate the cabbage. This is how you do this. So I need you to look out at all of our viewers and listeners and say, hey, what can you do today that could make a difference?
So this is exactly the right place to go, Claire, and for exactly the right reason. Number one is tell your story. Tell your story. Tell your story about what it means when Elon Musk cuts the Social Security Administration offices. Tell your story about what it means when he wants to shut down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Tell your story either way about what worked for you and why it's important to you, why you will fight for public education. Join me on Save Our Schools. I've asked people all across this country, tell your story about a teacher who changed your life. Tell your story about why it matters that our public schools get federal money so that children with significant challenges can have the extra help that they need. Tell those stories. Why? Because the stories are what go out, and tell them everywhere. Put them online everywhere. Tell the story about your neighbor. Put it online with your friends you went to school with, the friends who have moved somewhere else. Put it out there in red places and blue places. I cannot tell you how important the stories are. Number two, never underestimate the power of organizing. Whatever groups you belong to, and some are obvious, Indivisible is out there, your local Democratic Party is out there, but your union is strong. Your union amplifies voices. Your group in your church, your group that you work with, any group you work with, because one person has a loud voice, but two people have an even louder voice. And we keep each other going in those hard times. When it really gets tough, being part of a group, we lift each other up. And the third one, these are hard times. You got to take care of yourself. You know how they say on airplanes, put your own mask on before you try to help others? We all have to make it through this. And making it through this means you got to have a little self-care here. You got to have a friend. You got to have someone you talk with. You got to have a little bit of time when you say, I'm going to rebuild my energy so I can get back into this fight. What we don't do is we don't say it's hard and therefore we're giving up. We don't have to give up. We have the majority of American people with us, and I don't mean a little majority.
Big.
I mean a big, big majority. We just need to gather that energy and to say we're going to have a government that reflects the goodness of who we are. That's a fight worth having.
Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, thank you very much for coming on this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for the good advice. And still ahead on Morning Joe, we'll be joined by the co-directors of a new documentary that is shedding light on the negative impact of social media on young kids and the legal battle with big tech companies. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.